Major support for Out to Lunch is provided by the law firm of Jones Walker, established in 1937 with over 375 attorneys in offices throughout the U.S., providing a comprehensive range of services to a local, national, and international client base. JonesWalker.com. And by Hancock Whitney. Hancock Whitney is here for families, here for businesses, here for communities during this challenging time. Visit HancockWhitney.com/COVID-19 for the latest. And by Short & Associates, legal recruiters in Louisiana and Texas.
From across Louisiana, we're out to lunch with Peter Raschuti, Stephanie Regal, and Christian Mader. Peter Raschuti is Tulane University's Freeman School of Business Professor of Finance. Stephanie Regal is editor of the Baton Rouge Business Report. Christian Mader is publisher and editor of The Current. It's business, Louisiana style.
Hi, and welcome to Out to Lunch, Louisiana. I'm Christian Mader in Lafayette.
I'm Peter Raschuti in New Orleans.
I'm Stephanie Regal in Baton Rouge. As Louisiana reopens and we continue to navigate the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic, Christian, Peter, and I are taking a weekly statewide look at what's happening in the world of business and finance.
Today, we're going to be joined by Judi Terzotis, the publisher of the daily newspaper, The Advocate. The newspaper has editions in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Acadiana, and Lindsay Navarro. She's the executive director of El Centro, an organization that supports Louisiana's Latinx entrepreneurs.
But let's start in Baton Rouge, Stephanie, where I understand maybe the pandemic that we've been experiencing over the last few months feels like it might be kind of ending there. Or at least that's the attitude the business community might have. What's going on in Baton Rouge?
Well, Christian, like we were talking about a few minutes ago, you really get that sense that people are just willing things to be back to normal here. And so the thing that's going to be curious is does it work, right? I mean, are we going to see a huge resurgence in the middle of the summer? Or will things really go back to as close to normal as we can get? I mean, I'm not saying that people outside of the conservative members of the state legislature are not taking precautions, because businesses very definitely are. But I mean, you're really seeing a resumption of commercial activity. I was touring a mixed-use traditional neighborhood development last week, and I mean, construction is blowing and going there. They've been selling new houses in the moderate to upper end segment of the market, homes in the $600,000, $800,000 range, at least one a week at the slowest part of the pandemic. So that sort of gives you an idea of where things are. As pools reopen and camps reopen, people are out and about. And the restaurants and the bars, even though they're still under, the phase 2 guidelines that limit the number of people they can have in there, it really doesn't look like there's a whole lot of social distancing going on when you drive by and you see a bunch of people crowded on the patios. They're not wearing masks, and they certainly are standing close together. So whatever the capacity limits are, it looks very much like things are sort of back to normal.
Stephanie, one of the things, Wall Street is rolling along, really doing well. And sometimes they say there's a difference between Wall Street and Main Street. Wall Street's betting on a lot of pent-up demand. Where do you think the most pent-up demand is?
It's interesting because I think Wall Street's as disconnected from reality as a lot of people in the Baton Rouge business community are. I mean, I really think there are huge socioeconomic studies to be done on this one day. But I mean, the small businesses are hurting, right? So, I mean, people just who haven't been able to get their hair cut, who haven't been out to go shopping, who haven't done things like that. I think that's where you're going to see a whole lot of demand. I mean, of course, there's been the whole slowdown in the industrial sector, industrial construction. That's really not going to change because that's being influenced by the oil prices, right? Real estate here really hasn't been affected here yet. And if things continue to recover and we don't have a huge setback in the next 2 months, I think real estate's going to do just fine. So, I mean, it's really in the retail sector, I think, where there's been so much pent up demand. Now, I mean, even though the crowds are coming back, the restaurants are going to struggle. And we've heard of some restaurants that are closed for good because even at a 25 or 50% capacity, they can't make it, and their margins were so tight to begin with that it's going to be tough. But people are willing this thing away. So the question is, will it actually work? Christian, in Lafayette, are you seeing that same sort of mentality, among the business community? And how are the small business? How's Main Street Lafayette doing?
The main street in Lafayette, in a lot of ways, if you kind of think about the layout of a traditional city, right, is Jefferson Street in downtown Lafayette. And by all accounts, it was back over the weekend. And I long ago gave up my evening jaunts, but my understanding is the bars are, kind of starting to come back. Downtown, if anything, is kind of known for having a pretty vibrant bar scene, and people, I guess, couldn't fit all inside of these bars. And so they're sort of spilling into the streets. So it's a version of downtown life that certainly existed beforehand, meaning, I can recall, mounted police and things like that trying to deal with crowd control before people weren't sort of allowed to all go inside of a building. But it's still kind of jarring to think that, for a period of time, we were all watching movies and kind of cringing when people were shaking hands. And then now, people are just like crunching into Jefferson Street and bringing out ice chests to go drinking, right? And it doesn't sound like my idea of a good time, but people are doing it again,
One of the things I think you have to think about in Lafayette, Christian, is that there's just culturally, it's a real hugging kind of being together, family oriented. Do you think that's pushing it up? Do you think that's quickening the way things go? They just can't take it anymore.
I don't know if there was anything sort of family oriented about people going downtown. I, with all due apologies to the people that try to make it that way. But I mean, yeah, it's a good time and kind of place. And I think there's got to be something to be said for folks having, spent the last few months being unable to do that. And I mean, to some extent, you guys talked about sort of pent up demand. Like, yes, there's likely some pent up demand. I mean, we had a pretty seasonably nice spring, and yet no one could go downtown or kind of get out onto the verandas and do their, outdoor drinking. And so I think maybe that has something to do with it. I mean, certainly the thing that I've witnessed over the past few months is just people biking everywhere. And so maybe they're just sort of tired of that, and it's too hot to bike, but, just hot enough to drink, right? So I think that's maybe what's going on there. And it's interesting, kind of speaking of biking and changes in the way people get around. Peter, I understand that in New Orleans, right, they're thinking about shutting down the French Quarter to car traffic, which is actually something that I think is kind of in the ether here, like the idea that maybe they should turn portions of downtown, at least temporarily, into pedestrian walkways. And that's a trend that we're seeing nationally. In fact, I mean, tell us about that. Is the mayor really going to get this done? I mean, it kind of makes sense at face value, right?
Yeah, and one of the things about COVID-19 is we're trying to figure out what is going to be the lasting impacts. The one everybody talks about is that more and more of us are going to be working from home, but this is more of a local issue. And Mayor Cantrell has put together a task force to look at how this would be done to get the cars out of the French Quarter. And I'm sure it would be controversial. In fact, there would be some businesses that it would be a positive for, and some would be a negative. One of the things she said in a press conference was that it would be good for restaurants in that they could now have tables outdoors. And then she also mentioned that street musicians would be not run over. That would be a good thing too. And it's just going to be interesting to see what the business community thinks of all that. And of course, what happens is when you saw the French Quarter completely empty, it just made you reimagine what that place could be in a way that you would never get a chance to see it like that.
So, Peter, I mean, New Orleans is sort of a famously European city, right? I mean, it's maybe perhaps the most European city in the United States, San Francisco being the other, I suppose. But, you go overseas, and that's pretty common in central cities to break the whole thing down to no cars. So maybe this just makes sense. I mean, why didn't they do this before?
Yeah, I looked it up, and there were a few times they've tried this before. Mayor Mitch Landrieu tried it, only with kind of little barricades that you see there every once in a while. But it is a very, very good question. It is so much a pedestrian area. I know at Tulane's campus, for instance, we'd had the main street was driving for forever, and they took it out, and it's a pedestrian walkway, and it's 100 times better. So I think when people get the chance to see it like that, I really do think there would be no turning back.
It's going to definitely be interesting to see how it all shakes out. You're listening to Out to Lunch, Louisiana with Peter Raschuti in New Orleans, Christian Mader in Lafayette, and I'm Stephanie Riegel in Baton Rouge. Whatever else has happened to you over the past few months, you've more than likely been keeping up with everything that's going on by checking the news. Along with NPR, some of Louisiana's most reliable news sources are the local newspaper, Baton Rouge and Acadiana editions of the Advocate, both in print and online. And in New Orleans, of course, there's NOLA Times-Picayune. The publisher of all the editions is Judi Terzotis. Judi, it's good to see you again. Welcome back to Out to Lunch.
Thank you so much.
And of course, the last time we spoke on this show back in February, which now seems like a lifetime ago, you were talking about how the Advocate was bucking national newspaper trends in the face of shrinking circulations and streamlined newsrooms in other places. The Advocate was actually hiring. It was growing. It had recently acquired the Times-Picayune. It was seeing new revenue streams, and then COVID hit. And now when you go to the Advocate's website, there's an advertisement that says our COVID-19 news team needs your help. And there's actually a donate button. I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm listening to public radio when I'm on your site. It's been reported that y'all have had to lay off people and some have had to take pay cuts. What was it about the pandemic that really turned the Advocate from an outlier media success story into a newspaper that's having a tough time?
Yeah, and I still contend we're an outlier. We did what smart business people do, is we hunkered down. I will tell you, there were days in March where my chief revenue officer came into my office and said, we had $400,000 canceled today. The next day he would come in and say, we had $600,000 canceled today. And I'm not exaggerating. Of course, these are primarily, that kind of money is your large national chains who really had to reinvent themselves and how that they were going to market to their best customers. So we did what all businesses do. We looked inward and said, okay, we got to protect our readership. We got to make sure we have robust products. And, we've got to be able to serve our business community. So what can we do differently? We didn't lay people off. We actually put a group of folks on unpaid leave and intend to bring them back. We had the whole time have been paying them all 100% of their health insurance, and they could apply for unemployment. Then we took the rest of the staff and put a furlough in place. So not a pay cut. I mean, yes, it's less money, but they're getting time in return. So we launched initially in March of 1 day a week. So basically a 20% pay cut. And with that, though, I've been able to put back hours as businesses return. Yet you mentioned, we launched a donation campaign, as most media companies have done across the country. For-profit, nonprofit have put into place. We partner with local media association who has a nonprofit arm, a foundation. All of the donations go 100% to hours in the newsroom to cover COVID-19. So we obviously working with our accountants, external, internal, to make sure that we have the reporting. Well, a lot of things, as you know, when you take donations, you take grants, they're very buttoned up. And so very, very careful about that. So now we're at a place that our journalists are only taking one furlough day a month. So that shows you what has happened since March, where it was 1 day a week. Now it's only 1 day for the entire month, and I hope to be able to dissolve that in the next month. And so we've been putting back hours, but yes, we can't just hunker down. So we are also looking forward. And so you'll see now that we have job postings for critical positions that we intend to hire. So it is going to be a return. Thank goodness we got out of the gate very, very strong in Q1. That is really helping us weather the storm. But I think we're all learning how do we interact with our readers differently? How do we help advertisers gain traction in terms of getting a strong ROI? So it's an interesting challenge that I keep thinking to myself, this is going to end. There's a silver lining out of this, because how we interact is going to be very different, and that's a positive for sure. So yeah, we're learning with the rest of the world about how to reinvent ourselves.
And one of the criticisms that you heard when you all were soliciting donations was that they are privately owned, and they're owned by one of the well-known wealthiest businessmen in the state, right? And he lives on a private gated street in uptown New Orleans. And so how did you all respond to that when you did hear that criticism?
Yeah, I mean, we're a business, and we're one of John's businesses that have also, his other businesses have been severely impacted. So you run a business like a good, strong business should be run, regardless if you're owned by a national chain with, deep, deep pockets, as I used to work for Gannett, and, you run you just run for the best of the business and making sure that you're making those decisions, regardless of who your owner is.
So in a lot of ways, Judi, you kind of, what you guys seem to have experienced happened to a lot of news organizations across the country, sort of this coronavirus bump, right? Where all of a sudden everybody's interested in the news and yet it doesn't turn into revenue, right? So it raises this kind of interesting question about, from my perspective, right, is that I run a nonprofit media organization. Like, yeah, this is an extreme event, but does it not underscore a severe problem in the way for-profit news organizations are even run? Like the idea that if what we're selling is the information that people need, and yet when people need the information the most, we can't turn that into profit, it kind of raises some serious questions about the viability long-term, doesn't it?
Well, we launched, as you know, Christian, a digital subscription model a little over a year ago. We did put it on pause when we were bringing in the Times-Picayune and Nolan.com into our organization. So I kind of say it's about a year old, even though it's a little bit more than a year old. We have seen a direct correlation. We're up 4 times what we were averaging in a given week in digital-only subscriptions. So we're sitting at about 10,000 digital-only subscribers right now, which is way ahead of our projections. It's not enough. It's not good enough. Most newsrooms, they're trying to at least get the number of digital-only subscribers to pay one time the payroll for the newsrooms. There's other organizations are like, that's not aggressive enough. You need to have enough digital subscriber revenue to double what you're paying in the newsroom to help offset. We also have seen a big increase in digital advertising, which was really the pleasant surprise out of it. Although print has been, it has definitely been impacted on ROP, but our digital advertising has held its own. And then some months in the last few months have actually exceeded our, of course, last year, but also our budgeted numbers. So we're seeing more people are coming to us. So we are seeing a direct correlation with digital subscribers and digital revenue. So it gives us, again, it's, how do you transform a traditional media organization? You better be running as hard as you can into digital. This is forcing us, because we have been a very traditional, news organization, because this Southern corridor still believes in print. And Stephanie and I were talking about that in February. It is, you look anywhere else in the country, and it's very rare to see the kind of print subscriber numbers that we have. On Sunday, we still have 165,000 print subscribers across 3 markets. That's big. It's bigger than Nashville. It's bigger than Des Moines. It's bigger than Indy. So we have those. We still think print is an important part of our business model, but man, we are doubling down in digital.
Judi, one great business truism is that the first thing that gets cut is advertising. But on the other hand, it's usually the first thing to come back. Are you starting to see some signs of that?
Yes, thank goodness. About probably almost a month ago, we started, really we're trying to get advertisers to talk to us, get ready for when it comes back. Let's have your strategies developed. Let's make sure we have all the tactics in place. And man, they weren't wanting to talk to us in early April. They're like, that sounds nice, but I'm hoping, I'm trying to figure out how I pay my staff or what my business even looks like. So about a month ago, we started getting yes, we really need to get going. And so, out of the gate, print revenue was down 48 to 50%. And now looking in June, we'll be down maybe about 25%. So you can see the big, and really national advertisers the RFPs are finally coming in. So for July, August, are we banking on a big Q4? Yes, because we do feel like that pent up demand is there. And we have confidence in it because we're seeing the RFP come from, the largest national advertisers. So cautiously optimistic, but I remain very, very concerned about the local retailers, because it's more important now than ever that we come up with the solutions that are going to provide that ROI for them, because I think they're in the fight of their life. And so I feel that's something that's very important to us, is to make sure we're taking care of our local advertisers.
So Judi, I'm curious, how well did the donation strategy work? I mean, you're kind of going to the public and saying, this is something that we need, right? This is a public service. It's tied to a specific editorial product. I mean, did it plug the gap when you're talking about $1 million in 2 days of lost advertising revenue?
Well, not for the, but it certainly plugged hours. I mean, we're sitting right now probably in the 70,000 that we've raised in the last 2 months. Not shabby, right? And continue every day to have, I mean, I go out on, we're using again through LMA, and I can go out in their portal and see, and there's, days that literally will get, 30 donations of $25. And some days we'll get 2 or 3 $1,000 donations. And what I love, and you'll understand this, Christian, is they're able to write you notes. And I mean, the inspiring things that they're saying about our journalists being on the front line, and really they count on us, and they're supporting us. So it's a piece of the puzzle. We also applied to a number of grants. So Facebook and Google were both very good to us, and to the tune of about $200,000. So that's like a pittance to them. That's couch money, right? but we'll take it.
Do you see that continuing, Judi, once things go back to normal? I mean, will you all be looking at new revenue streams like this?
Absolutely. I mean, it's definitely, you and I talked, you remember we talked about events. And so we had $1 million budgeted in event revenue. Yeah, that was an ouchie, because really we're not going to get anywhere near that. And so, we've tried to reinvent ourselves a little bit. We've done virtual town halls with sponsors, but that's like tiny, it really wasn't the big dollars that we really, in terms of diversification, we're going to be able to achieve in that manner. So yes, we continue. And I think, we have a beautiful printing press here in Baton Rouge. And so we're aggressively going after more commercial printing so we can fill up hours. So we're looking at every opportunity for revenue infusion. And I think we're really positioned to do very well this year. I really feel like this dip will come out of it. I'm very confident.
Judi Terzotis is publisher of The Advocate. Judi, thank you so much for joining us today on Out to Lunch, Louisiana.
You're welcome.
You're listening to Out to Lunch, Louisiana with Stephanie Regal in Baton Rouge, Christian Mader in Lafayette, and I'm Peter Raschuti in New Orleans. There's no two ways about it. This is a tough time to be in business. There is help available to get through this rough patch in the form of business loans, even grants. Some are through federal agencies, some are through state agencies, and there's money available from city governments in New Orleans and Baton Rouge and Lafayette. Getting a hold of this money is not easy. Typically, businesses benefit from being a member of a business alliance to help them navigate the maze of regulation and bureaucracy. But some businesses are too small to join alliances like the Chamber of Commerce. For those small owner-operated businesses, getting access to financial expertise is very, very challenging. You might be a great hairdresser, house painter, or plumber, but that doesn't mean you have great or even any business skills. Now imagine having the added problem of not being able to speak English. And that's the position many Latinx self-employed people find themselves today in Louisiana. And that's why there's an organization called El Centro. El Centro provides business assistance for Latinx entrepreneurs. The executive director of El Centro is Lindsay Navarro. Lindsay, welcome to Out to Lunch.
Hi, thank you, Peter. It's such a pleasure to be here and truly an honor. It's hard for me to not fangirl in this moment. I love this show and the opportunity to share. I think what our organization is doing it means a lot to me.
And tell me what the footprint looks like. Are you in parts of Louisiana, all of Louisiana?
Yeah, so we're based out of the greater New Orleans area. To be honest, we've got a partnership with the Mexican consulate. And so I've traveled as far as Lafayette, as far as Lake Charles, up to Baton Rouge as well. And we even have customers who call us all the way out from Shreveport. So we're small but mighty, and the reach is quite broad across the state just because the need is so great for this resource within the community.
Lindsay, what is the number one question you're getting from these entrepreneurs during this time?
I think a lot of them are looking for capital. I think a lot of them are not sure how they're going to weather this storm. What we've faced, a lot of folks, what we're really seeing are the number of business owners who think they have employees but realize that they have independent contractors. And so when it comes to being eligible for some of this funding, they don't have the payroll to really meet the needs of the company. And so we've seen companies as small as, one-person shows, and then folks who are working in construction who have, 10 to 15 independent contractors. And so when they're applying for funding like the PPP, they don't quite meet the payroll requirements. And a lot of them had no idea this even existed. A lot of them felt that this wasn't meant for them. They weren't sure if they had to go to the bank or if they had to go to the government. And I think within the Latinx community or the Hispanic community, we have a fear for government. And the responsibility, I think, of even committing to a loan can be very daunting for some of these folks. And so when one thing is the application, and the application wasn't actually translated to Spanish until 2 weeks ago. And so while the government was touting this opportunity, it really wasn't language accessible for the community at large. And a lot of folks didn't feel that they were going to meet the requirements, meet the credit thresholds either, and they didn't even know where to start. So it's been interesting to have to educate the community and work with them. And so we work with Latinx individuals hand in hand, individuals and entrepreneurs in accessing that capital, helping them complete those applications. At first, it was the EIDL and helping them gain access to the portal. We created a YouTube video in Spanish that actually taught people step by step how to fill out the application. We even created a how-to guide. And then what was unfortunate was that a couple of weeks later, the portal was closed. And so I don't think people could rush to it fast enough. So now we're trying to connect folks to the PPP. And a lot of the Latinx community, a lot are ITIN holders, which means that they're taxpayers, but they may not have authorized work permits, so they can't work as employees. So they then by default are qualified as independent contractors. And so a lot of them didn't see themselves as eligible for some of this funding. So I think educating them in that aspect in and of itself was, demystifying this. For folks to realize, like, hey, I'm eligible and this money can actually help me, right?
So Lindsay, you touched on a point that I think a lot of folks have raised about that specific program, namely the payroll protection program, and sort of the wide gaps that it had for certain businesses that really fell through the cracks, right? So, a concern that we've seen here in Lafayette is, okay, well, where do we send them? Yeah, maybe they can get an economic injury disaster loan, but maybe that's not quite as generous as it would be if I were an employer. I mean, have you found situations where people, really fell through the cracks to the points where we're seeing like lots of business closures? I mean, has it been that damaging, or have you guys been able to really point them in a direction where you can keep them going with a proper bridge loan?
Yeah, we haven't started to see the business closures, but I think we're getting to that point. I think we could potentially see it if there aren't incentives for the landlords to help accommodate for some of the rents that some of these folks are incurring. So I think every situation is extremely different. We've seen our media partners also have a difficult time making ends meet, not being eligible for the PPP because they had a ton of independent contractors as opposed to employees. And so, we're not quite there seeing the closures just yet, but I can't say it's inevitable. I think it's going to happen, and I think it's going to be unfortunate. But we try our best to connect folks. And so we're allies, we work very closely with the SBA and very closely with the SBDC. We're essentially that Spanish speaking liaison for the SBDC. And I think just kind of preparing folks for the capital is key. And I think what's happening a lot of times is a lot of these business owners were bootstrapping. A lot of these business owners, it's their first time accessing capital. And typically you access capital because you want to make a large investment. And in this case, they're just hoping to keep businesses afloat. And so I think it's a very different situation.
So Lindsay, you raise a point though that I wanted to jump on that, because access to capital and the challenges therein is something we're hearing from a lot of minority business owners now as we're addressing issues related to the George Floyd protests and whatnot, and that's what you hear from minority business owners all the time, irrespective of the pandemic, right? Is how do they access capital? So I mean, even in the best of times, at a very practical sort of granular level, what can y'all do at El Centro? What do you do to help these really little guys and gals get money?
Yeah, so I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to highlight my background is actually in microfinance, and I worked with LaFund, which is one of the largest micro lenders in the nation. And so we're very familiar with alternative lenders. And when I say alternative lenders, most people think we're three-headed monsters and that they're payday lenders, right, or loan sharks. And what we're really trying to do, I think, across the nation is combat that, to educate folks. I think a lot of times business owners think that the big banks are their only option, and they don't really see the difference or the distinction between a large national bank, a regional bank, a community bank, or even a credit union. And so that's that knowledge that the business owner won't have, just because they're great at running their businesses, but they don't have to know where to access capital, right? The goal is for them to connect to an organization like ours who can say, look, we'll help you navigate the system. It looks like you're asking the wrong person for money. Let me get you in front of the right person so that you can get the answer that you need. And I think part of that is what we do, right? Helping them pull that package together, making sure that they're prepared to have that initial conversation so that they have all their cards placed on the table so that they can get the right answer.
Lindsay, this is Peter. I don't think people understand how big the Latinx business community is. What kind of numbers should we be throwing around?
Yeah, so statewide, according to the census, the 2010 census, we've got over 15,000, or a little less than 15,000. I think the number was 14,900 something. So a little less than 15,000. And these are folks that are registered businesses. So this doesn't account for the number of people who are sole proprietors, who aren't registered, who are informal businesses. I mean, we have a very large informal economy. When you go to Central and South America, what you see is, I mean, even I have an aunt who sells ice cream from her house, right? And she doesn't necessarily have to go to the city, to the municipality to register that business. And so a lot of folks do that, right? They have that side hustle, like we say here in New Orleans, and that's very real within this economy as well.
So in some ways, Lindsay, you're undercounted.
Yes, we're extremely undercounted, and I think a lot of it is a fear. I think a lot of it is a lack of familiarity with the importance of the process. Right now, we're working closely with the Hispanic Chamber, with the media, to really raise awareness about the importance of the census, in particular for our community. So the last person I really talked to about the representation or lack of, or underrepresentation or undercounting of the community was actually with a member from Telemundo. And they said that in 2010, after the census happened, or after the census had concluded, they began asking individuals in the community if they had participated, and they found that 7 out of 10 Latinx individuals had said they hadn't participated in the census. So, and we've seen a large influx of Hispanics in the community, particularly in the greater New Orleans area. I think 6 or 7 of the parishes within the greater New Orleans area have actually doubled in within the Hispanic. The Hispanic population has actually doubled within those parishes. And so I think more than ever, this was a resource that was extremely needed, that I saw, like I said, coming from a lender background, I hate to say, I was tired of denying people. And I realized if I can just put my knowledge to good use and prepare folks to have this conversation, then we can really get them the access to capital that they need. And whether that is a business loan or even a mortgage, we've managed to identify those lenders who are willing to work within the community to help make those exceptions so that these folks can build what we call in Spanish patrimonio, or that equity.
Lindsay Navarro is the executive director of El Centro. Lindsay, thank you so much for joining us on Out to Lunch, Louisiana.
Thank you, Peter. It was a pleasure.
And thank you for joining us for this edition of Out to Lunch, Louisiana. We edited these conversations to fit into the time slot here on your NPR station. You can hear longer versions of these conversations wherever you normally get your Out to Lunch podcast. If you're not an Out to Lunch podcast subscriber, search for Out to Lunch Baton Rouge, or Out to Lunch Acadiana on your podcast app.
At some point, we hope to go back to hosting Out to Lunch around the lunch table, but for now, our Lafayette Out to Lunch restaurant, the French Press, is doing curbside takeout. And you can pick up their regular menu items or family dinner, and you can get delivery through Waiter or Grubhub.
In New Orleans, Commander's Palace is closed, but you can have a range of ready-to-cook items shipped from Commander's Kitchen to yours anywhere nationwide. Information is at goldbelly.com.
In Baton Rouge, Mansur's on the Boulevard is open. You can eat at the restaurant where they have 50% occupancy and outdoor dining, or get pickup.
Out to Lunch, Louisiana is a production of I&O Broadcasting. The producer of our show is Grant Morris. Our technical producer is Eric Merle. And photos from this show on our website and social media are taken by Jill LaFleur. I'm Peter Raschuti in New Orleans.
I'm Stephanie Riegel in Baton Rouge.
And I'm Christian Mader in Lafayette. thanks for joining us today. We'll see you back here next week for more Out to Lunch Louisiana.
Major support for Out to Lunch is provided by the law firm of Jones Walker, established in 1937 with over 375 attorneys in offices throughout the U.S., providing a comprehensive range of services to a local, national, and international client base. JonesWalker.com. And by Hancock Whitney. Hancock Whitney is here for families, here for businesses, here for communities during this challenging time. Visit HancockWhitney.com/COVID-19 for the latest. And by Short & Associates, legal recruiters in Louisiana and Texas. Mitchell Foreman wrote and performs all the music on Out to Lunch. You can hear Mitchell's music anywhere great jazz is sold or streamed, and at mitchellforeman.com.